With the human population in crisis, how will future generations pay for care for the current ones? I mean, just look at some of these headlines. China's population is declining. Mass protesters reject a French plan to raise the retirement age. The US national debt is exploding. They're all part of the same human story, and the ending doesn't look to be very happy. It's very funny to me, as someone who grew up in the 2000s and 2010s, how I kept hearing about overpopulation and how that was the world's biggest problem. But today, shrinking populations is all I hear about. After reading about the major worldwide implications of China's shrinking population, I thought it would be a good idea to talk about what is happening with the dwindling population in China and how it could easily happen here at home in the United States. For one thing, many younger Americans are opting out and they're choosing to not have kids. Check it out.
Experts say more and more millennials, and especially Gen Z, saying kids are something they are either unsure about or a hard no about. Matt Bedreau is a generational consultant. He zeroes in on Gen Z to explain.
There's about 40% that are citing that they wouldn't mind having kids, but they're watching the way millennial moms are struggling to balance motherhood and a career.
Kata Thomas is studying drama and filmmaking at NYU.
I don't think I'm going to have kids or give birth, but I would be open to adopting.
From this perspective, we can take China's population crisis as a warning for our own. China is at a crucial turning point in terms of their population, and even by their government's own assessment. Who doesn't always come up with the most realistic numbers? China's population decreased last year, a trend that experts believe will continue throughout the century. The main culprit is the drastic decline in China's birth rate. It's now hit its lowest point since the founding of the People's Republic in 1949. In just the last 7 years, the number of births has almost halved, dropping from 18 million in 2016 to 9.6 million in 2022. Things are getting to the point that even if the birth rate stabilizes, experts predict that China's population will still decline by 50% or more by 2100. By then, it might be only half the size of India's population and comparable to the size of Nigeria's. For one thing, the one-child policy led to a scarcity of females because every family wanted a little boy that would support them in their decrepitude. That puts a lot of pressure on a small number of women now. China's population dilemma, with its aging population, fewer births, and gender imbalances, it's a big deal not just for them, but for the whole world, especially the United States. The possible economic slowdown in China thanks to a shrinking workforce could cause problems for the global supply chains and world trade. And as the number of working age individuals drops, businesses might have to deal with higher labor costs, especially those who rely on China for their cheap labor. Not to mention, Chinese consumers getting older might change their patterns of consumption, creating both opportunities and challenges for businesses worldwide. And since China is a massive market for US exports, any slowdown there could mean fewer demand for American goods and services. Plus, you know how all of the world's financial markets are intertwined. China accounts for almost 20% of global GDP, so their economic challenges could have far-reaching effects on investor confidence worldwide. In China's changing demographics, there might be more competition for resources globally, shaking up commodity markets and global politics. And it's not just about money. The whole population shift in China could mess with geopolitics and international relations, especially the already tense relationship between China and the United States. So yeah, what's happening with China's people has a lot of big picture effects on the world. I think you get the picture, guys. China's population crisis is something that we need to talk about. Much like most of the topics that we cover here on the channel, no media noise and party bias here, guys. I just do my best to present you guys with the truth and share the right information with everyone out there. So yeah, if you haven't already, definitely subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell for more content like this. And hey, I just want to thank you guys so much for always watching. I really appreciate the support, especially you lighting up the like button all the time. Thank you guys so much. Taking a look at the demographic challenges China's facing makes you really wonder if the United States could see similar stuff down the road. Sure, the US has its own deal going on with immigration and birth rates and all, but it's not totally immune to demographic changes. A drop in the birth rate, more old folks, and shifts in the workforce, it might start messing with the economy in the US, kind of like what's happening in China. If this plays out, it could mean changes in the job market, affecting industries and the supply chain. Plus, consumer behavior could easily change when you consider an aging US population. So, policymakers, businesses, and you guys watching at home, we all need to pay attention as understanding the potential parallels between China's population crisis and factors influencing demographic trends in the US becomes even more important in the present. I think a lot of people have known this for quite a while. You don't have to be a very skilled demographer to understand what the one-child policy over there for many years meant in terms of the aging population. I've heard from Chinese people. They themselves admit that the generations under the one-child policy are very self-centered and that they no longer take having children as the task they have to do for our family. So they think twice before deciding to have children. They also want to explore their own lives more before they decide to bring more lives onto the planet. But as you have fewer young people, that makes the population eventually pretty top-heavy. And in addition, you have lowered growth. But as the population ages, there are proportionately fewer women in the childbearing ages. And add on to that the strong restrictions toward fertility. As for the US, the recent census shows we've had the second slowest growth in our population in over a decade in our history. The first was during the 1930s when we had the Great Depression. A lot of that is due to the lower fertility that we've had over time. And this is a natural occurrence over the course of a developed country because more women go into the labor force, put off having children, maybe wind up having fewer children as they put their careers or their work lives ahead of the immediate childbearing for a while. The past 10 years has been pretty tough, especially for the younger millennial crowd who are still dealing with the fallout from the Great Recession of 2007 through 2009. This struggle has continued into the next decade, affecting the fertility rates in the United States. The pandemic didn't help matters much. Even though the census was done in April of 2020, right when it all started, the estimates that follow the census show that fertility did not bounce back, especially during those peak pandemic years. There's been a tiny improvement since the very bad earlier period, but we've also faced unexpected challenges, like a higher number of pandemic-related deaths. On the bright side, immigration, which has slowed in the 2010s, has picked up again in the last year. So that is some good news. When we look at the slow population growth over the last decade, it's a mix of ongoing trends, specific economic issues from that time, and restrictions on immigration, especially during the Trump administration. All of these factors combined have led to somewhat slower population growth. Now, what experts are predicting is a growth, but much slower growth as far as the US population is concerned. These last few years, the pandemic created very slow growth, almost flat growth. The calendar year, July 2020 to 2021, we only had like 0.1 to 0.2% growth during that period. Now, we're not going to go all the way down to that level, but we sure aren't going to see a pandemic baby boom like earlier predicted. Of course, you still can't talk about the US's aging population without going into things like Social Security and Medicare and how and whether Congress is going to be trimming those. The estimates say the Social Security Trust Fund could deplete as early as 2034. So the big picture here is that our population is aging and the working age or child population isn't growing as fast, at least for the next couple of decades. The baby boomers, this massive group of people, are getting older. Over half of them are already 65 years old or older, and the rest will join them by 2030. What this means is that folks might end up working past the usual retirement age, probably because there's a whole bunch of them entering those older age brackets. Even with people working longer, many will still depend on things like Social Security and Medicare for their well-being. Since the younger generation isn't booming in numbers, there's more pressure on them to support the older folks, creating a different kind of reliance between the two age groups. It's also interesting to mention that a lot of these older baby boomers aren't too keen on immigration, thinking it's messing with the country and ruining the culture and all that. Yet they're going to need the help of these younger people coming in as they head into retirement and rely on those services. I wonder if the younger generation will have the same attitude when they are asked to support the older generations down the road. So far in the United States, we've raised the retirement age quite a bit before, and there might be talks about it happening again. But it's also worth noting that when you've got a bunch of people getting older, you've also got a bunch of voters in that age bracket. So as more people get into those age groups, saying anything about cutting back on Social Security definitely will not be a popular move in politics. They say that for the coming years and decades of the 21st century, the demographic transition in China will constitute a major constraint on the growth of Chinese power. A working age population that peaked in 2011 at more than 900 million will have declined decline by nearly a quarter to some 700 million mid-century. These workers will have to provide by then for nearly 500 million Chinese aged 60 years old and older compared with 200 million today. America's social security challenges seem like a policy picnic by comparison. By century's end, according to the predictions, the United States will have well over 400 million people, or more than half of China's expected total. China will still be much bigger in population, definitely, but the two countries aren't going to be in totally different leagues anymore. Considering NATO and key Asian allies, the Western Alliance system already boasts a billion people today. That's 70% of China's total population. Sure, some of the US allies are dealing with declining demographics, but overall, the numbers in this bloc are expected to stay pretty steady. Thanks to modest population growth in the US and the Philippines, it's helping offset declines in Europe, Japan, and Korea. So, not too long after 2050, the Western Alliance network will come close to matching China's total population, and on a per capita basis, the West is likely to stay wealthier. Some experts even predict that China might overtake the United States in gross domestic product in coming decades, only to have America regain the claim to the world's biggest economy toward the end of the century. Now, this doesn't mean that we should just take it easy when it comes to the challenges posed by Beijing. China's power and military might are somewhat limited in the short to medium term because of the military and high-tech dominance of the US and its allies. In the long run, China's power is constrained by demographics and limited resources. If the Western countries can get their acts together, time might not be overwhelmingly on China's side. So what do you guys think? Should the population be a concern for Americans already? How do you guys feel about having children in this economy? Drop those comments down below and we'll pick this up on a future documentary. More interesting content to come in the next one. I'll see you guys there.